Standing in my childhood bedroom doorway, I watched my 8-year-old daughter Lily carefully arrange her stuffed animals on the basement pull-out couch. My parents had just informed us that my brother Marcus's daughter deserved the upstairs bedrooms because she was their special grandchild. 24 hours later, I discovered the real reason why. Hidden in my father's desk drawer was a trust fund document worth $2 million established solely for my niece, while my 3 children received nothing. But that was just the beginning of what I would uncover about my family's carefully constructed lies. Hey, everyone. Before we dive into this family betrayal that completely shattered everything I believed about blood, loyalty, drop a comment, and let me know where you are watching from. If you have ever dealt with family favoritism or discovered shocking family secrets, this story will hit close to home. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family justice. Trust me, you will want to see how this plays out. The basement smelled like mildew and broken dreams. As I tucked my children into their makeshift beds that first night, my youngest son, Oliver, asked why Grandma and Grandpa did not love them anymore. I had no answer. My parents, Rebecca and William Harrison, had always shown subtle favoritism toward Marcus and his daughter Sophia. But this was different. This was deliberate cruelty disguised as family hierarchy. The next morning, I confronted my mother in the kitchen. She was preparing organic strawberries and fresh squeezed orange juice for Sophia's breakfast while my kids ate store-brand cereal downstairs. Mom, why are my children being treated like second-class citizens in your home? Rebecca barely looked up from her elaborate breakfast preparation. Evangeline, you need to understand that Sophia has special needs. She requires stability and comfort. Your children are resilient, they can adapt. Special needs. I had never heard anything about Sophia having special needs. She seemed perfectly healthy and capable whenever I saw her. Something felt wrong about this entire narrative my parents had constructed. That afternoon, while everyone was at the country club pool, an invitation mysteriously not extended to my family, I decided to investigate. I started in my father's home office, a mahogany-paneled sanctuary where he conducted his investment business. The desk drawers were usually locked, but I remembered he kept a spare key taped under the antique lamp base. My hands trembled as I opened the first drawer. Inside were manila folders labeled with various financial documents. One folder caught my attention: Sophia Educational Trust Fund. The document inside made my blood run cold. $2 million had been set aside specifically for my niece's education and future established when she was only 2 years old. The fund was structured to provide her with private school tuition, college expenses, graduate school if needed, and a substantial nest egg for her adult life. I frantically searched for similar documents related to my children. Nothing. Not a single penny had been allocated for Lily Oliver or my eldest daughter Madison. My parents had literally invested in one grandchild's future while completely ignoring their other 3 grandchildren. But the financial favoritism was just the surface level of their deception. In another folder, I found correspondence between my parents and an elite private school admissions counselor. They had been secretly working to secure Sophia's placement at Westmont Academy, one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the state. The emails revealed that my parents had donated $50,000 to the school's building fund as part of Sophia's application process. The timeline was devastating. These arrangements had been in motion for over a year, meaning my parents had been planning to financially elevate Sophia while deliberately excluding my children long before this weekend's bedroom arrangements. The basement sleeping situation was not about space or convenience. It was about establishing a hierarchy that reflected their true feelings about their grandchildren's worth. I photographed every document with my phone, my heart racing with each revelation. The evidence painted a picture of systematic favoritism that went far beyond typical grandparent preferences. This was calculated financial discrimination against my children based on criteria I still did not understand. When I confronted my father that evening, his reaction confirmed my worst suspicions. "Evangeline, you are overreacting. Sophia's situation is complicated. Marcus has explained the circumstances to us, and we believe she needs additional support." "What circumstances, Dad? What are you not telling me about my 7-year-old niece that justifies this level of financial investment while my children get nothing?" William's eyes shifted nervously. "That is not your concern. Marcus is handling Sophia's affairs appropriately, and we are simply supporting his decisions as her father." The conversation felt rehearsed, as if my parents had prepared these vague responses to avoid revealing the real truth. Marcus had obviously fed them some story about Sophia requiring special treatment, but none of their explanations made logical sense. A healthy, intelligent 7-year-old does not need $2 million in trust funds and private school donations unless there were factors they were deliberately hiding from me. That night, I researched Westmont Academy online. The school specialized in educating children from wealthy families, but it also had a smaller program for students with exceptional academic potential regardless of economic background. However, the donation amounts my parents had contributed suggested they were not trying to secure a merit-based scholarship for Sophia. They were buying her way into an elite institution. The deeper I dug into the financial documents, the more questions arose. Why had Marcus never mentioned Sophia's supposed special needs during family gatherings? Why were my parents willing to spend enormous amounts of money on one grandchild while completely ignoring the educational and financial needs of their other 3 grandchildren? And most importantly, what was Marcus telling them about Sophia's situation that justified such extreme favoritism? I realized I was dealing with more than simple family bias. This was a coordinated effort to elevate one child while systematically disadvantaging mine. The basement sleeping arrangements were just the physical manifestation of an economic hierarchy my parents had been building in secret for years. As I lay awake that night listening to my children breathe softly on their uncomfortable basement beds, I knew I could not let this injustice continue. My kids deserved better than being treated as lesser members of their own family. Whatever Marcus had told my parents about Sophia, whatever lies or manipulations had created this situation, I was going to uncover the truth and fight for my children's dignity. The war for family justice was about to begin. The next morning brought an opportunity I had not expected. Marcus arrived early to pick up Sophia for their planned father-daughter day at the art museum. My parents were still sleeping, and my children were watching cartoons in the basement, giving me the perfect chance to confront my brother directly about the financial arrangements I had discovered. "Marcus, we need to talk. Privately." He looked surprised by my serious tone, but followed me out to the back patio. The morning sun cast long shadows across my mother's perfectly manicured garden, creating an almost theatrical backdrop for the conversation that was about to shatter our family's carefully maintained facade. I found the trust fund documents, Marcus. $2 million for Sophia's education and future. I also found the correspondence about Westmont Academy and the donation Mom and Dad made to secure her admission. I watched his face carefully for any sign of guilt or surprise. Instead of shock or shame, Marcus displayed something far more unsettling, calm confidence. I see you have been snooping through Dad's private papers. That seems like a violation of privacy, Evangeline. His deflection only confirmed my suspicions. Do not turn this around on me. Explain to me why your daughter deserves millions of dollars in educational support while my 3 children get absolutely nothing. What special circumstances have you told Mom and Dad about Sophia that justify this level of financial favoritism? Marcus sat down in one of the wicker patio chairs, his demeanor shifting from defensive to almost patronizing. You really do not understand the bigger picture here, do you? Sophia is not just any grandchild. She represents something much more important to Mom and Dad than your children ever could. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? They are all their grandchildren. They should be treated equally. Equality is a naive concept, Evangeline. Sophia carries the family legacy in ways your children simply cannot. She has the Harrison bloodline, the Harrison intelligence, and most importantly, she has the Harrison future. I stared at my brother, trying to process what he was actually saying. Marcus, what are you talking about? All of our children are Harrisons. They all carry the same family bloodline. His laugh was cold and calculating. Do they, though? Are you absolutely certain about that? The implication behind his question made my stomach turn. Are you suggesting that my children are not legitimate family members? That is insane, Marcus. You watch them being born. You know they are my biological children. I am not questioning your children's parentage, Evangeline. I am questioning whether Mom and Dad consider them worthy inheritors of the Harrison family legacy. Sophia represents purity of bloodline and breeding that your children unfortunately do not possess. The racist undertones of his statement became crystal clear. My ex-husband David was Mexican-American, which meant my children were mixed race. Sophia's father, Marcus's ex-wife's first husband, had been Irish-American with pale skin and light eyes. In my parents' twisted worldview, Sophia represented the kind of grandchild they wanted to claim publicly, while my beautiful mixed-race children were being systematically erased from the family narrative. You are telling me that Mom and Dad are discriminating against my children because they are not white enough for the Harrison family image. Marcus shrugged with disturbing nonchalance. I am telling you that Mom and Dad have invested in the grandchild who best represents their vision for the family's future. Sophia will attend elite schools, marry into prominent families, and continue the Harrison social standing. Your children, while lovely in their own way, do not fit that particular trajectory. The casual racism hidden beneath polite family dynamics suddenly made perfect sense. My parents had always been slightly uncomfortable when I brought David to family gatherings. They had made subtle comments about wanting grandchildren who looked like family portraits. I had dismissed their remarks as generational ignorance, but now I realized they had been expressing genuine prejudice that would later manifest in financial discrimination against my children. So you told them some story about Sophia needing special support to justify the trust fund and private school arrangements. I told them that Sophia has exceptional potential that should be nurtured through the best possible educational opportunities. I told them she represents the kind of grandchild who could bring prestige to the Harrison name through her achievements and social connections. I told them the truth, Evangeline, that investing in Sophia's future is investing in the family's legacy. The calculated nature of his manipulation was breathtaking. Marcus had not lied to our parents. He had simply framed Sophia's advantages in terms that appealed to their social ambitions and racial prejudices. He had positioned his daughter as the family's best hope for maintaining their elite social status, while positioning my children as genetic dilutions of the Harrison bloodline. You manipulated their racism to secure financial advantages for your daughter, while ensuring my children would be systematically excluded from family resources. I positioned Sophia to receive the support she deserves while allowing your children to develop independence and resilience through different circumstances. Some grandchildren are destined for private schools and trust funds. Others are destined for character building through adversity. His ability to reframe obvious discrimination as character development for my children was nauseating. Marcus had weaponized our parents' social climbing ambitions and racial biases to create a financial hierarchy that would impact our children's entire futures. But his confession had given me something powerful, the truth about how this system had been constructed and maintained. My parents were not innocent victims of Marcus's manipulation. They were willing participants in a scheme that reflected their own deepest prejudices about family worth and racial purity. I am going to expose this entire arrangement, Marcus. Mom and Dad need to understand how their favoritism is damaging all of their grandchildren, including Sophia. You can try, Evangeline. But consider this: who do you think Mom and Dad will believe their successful son, who has provided them with the perfect grandchild, or their divorced daughter, who is making accusations about racism and financial discrimination? Who do you think they want to believe? His confidence was chilling because he was probably right. My parents had invested so much emotional energy and actual money into the narrative that Sophia was special that admitting the truth would force them to confront their own moral failures. It would be much easier for them to dismiss my accusations as jealousy or troublemaking than to acknowledge their participation in systematic discrimination against their own grandchildren. As Marcus left with Sophia for their museum visit, I watched him load her into his luxury SUV, while my children remained relegated to the basement. The physical and financial separation was no accident. It was a carefully constructed system designed to reinforce racial and economic hierarchies within our own family. But Marcus had underestimated my determination to fight for my children's dignity. I was not going to let their grandfather's money and their uncle's manipulation determine my kids' worth or future opportunities. The battle for family justice was about to escalate, and I was prepared to use every piece of evidence I had gathered to expose the truth about the Harrison family's ugly secret. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. After Marcus left with Sophia, I knew I needed more than just financial documents and a recorded confession to challenge the systematic discrimination against my children. I needed allies' evidence and a strategy that would force my parents to confront their choices without allowing them to dismiss my concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. My first call was to my cousin Jessica, my father's sister's daughter, who had always been the family truth teller. Jessica lived in Chicago and visited my parents about twice a year, but she had an outsider's perspective on family dynamics that could prove invaluable. Jess, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever noticed favoritism towards Sophia during your visits to Mom and Dad's house? There was a long pause before Jessica responded. Evangeline, I have been waiting for someone in the family to acknowledge what has been happening. Yes, I have noticed. Last Christmas, Sophia received gifts worth probably $1,500, while your kids got maybe $200 worth of presents each. The disparity was so obvious that my own kids asked me why some cousins were getting better gifts than others. Her validation gave me confidence to continue. It goes deeper than Christmas presents, Jess. I found documentation of a $2 million trust fund for Sophia, plus private school arrangements that mom and dad are financing. My children have been systematically excluded from any educational or financial planning. That explains a lot, actually. During my last visit, your mom kept talking about Sophia's potential and how important it was to give her every advantage. She mentioned something about Sophia representing the family's future in ways that other grandchildren could not. At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic, but now it sounds like there was a deeper plan in place. Jessica agreed to help me document the favoritism by paying attention to specific interactions during her next visit. More importantly, she offered to speak with other family members who might have witnessed similar patterns of discrimination. My next ally came from an unexpected source, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. My children's pediatrician had known our family for years and had occasionally interacted with my parents during medical appointments. When I explained the situation, she offered insights that I had not considered. Evangeline, from a child development perspective, what you are describing constitutes emotional abuse through systematic exclusion and comparative treatment. Your children are being taught that their worth is determined by factors beyond their control, their racial background, and their parents' financial status. This kind of family dynamic can create lasting psychological damage, Dr. Mitchell offered to provide professional documentation about the potential harm this favoritism could cause to my children's emotional development. She also suggested that I document specific instances of discriminatory treatment to establish a pattern that could not be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Over the next 3 days, I began keeping a detailed record of every interaction between my parents and all 4 grandchildren. The documentation was heartbreaking, but necessary. Tuesday morning, my mother prepared a special breakfast of French toast and fresh fruit for Sophia, while telling my children they could make themselves cereal or toast. When Oliver asked if he could have French toast too, my mother explained that Sophia needed extra nutrition for her growing mind. Tuesday afternoon, my father took Sophia to the local bookstore and bought her 7 new books, including several expensive hardcover volumes. When my daughter Madison asked if they could go to the bookstore too, my father said maybe another time when they had more money to spend. Tuesday evening, during dinner conversation, my parents asked Sophia detailed questions about her interests, her school friends, and her future goals. They listened attentively to every response and praised her intelligence and maturity. When my children tried to contribute to the conversation, my parents gave polite but brief responses before redirecting attention back to Sophia. Wednesday morning, my mother spent an hour helping Sophia choose an outfit for their planned shopping trip, discussing colors and styles that would look best with Sophia's complexion and hair. My children were told to get dressed quickly because they would be staying home with me. Wednesday afternoon, my parents took Sophia to an upscale children's clothing store and spent over $400 on new outfits for her return to school. My children remained at home playing with toys they had brought from our apartment. The pattern was undeniable and consistent. Sophia received individual attention, financial investment, educational support, and emotional validation, while my children were treated as background figures in their own grandparents' home. But the most damaging evidence came from overhearing a phone conversation between my mother and her sister Helen on Wednesday evening. I was walking upstairs to use the main bathroom when I heard my mother's voice carrying from the kitchen. Helen, I know it seems harsh, but you have to understand that we are thinking about the family's future. Sophia has the breeding and the potential to really make something of herself. Evangeline's children are sweet, but they are going to face challenges that Sophia will never have to deal with. We can only do so much, and we have decided to invest our resources where they will make the most difference. The clinical way my mother discussed my children's limitations based on their racial background was devastating. She was not expressing temporary favoritism or personal preferences. She was articulating a long-term family strategy that had written off my children before they had even reached adolescence. I recorded the conversation on my phone, adding it to the growing collection of evidence that documented systematic discrimination within our family structure. Thursday brought another crucial ally when I reached out to Marcus's ex-wife, Patricia Sophia's mother. Patricia had always maintained a cordial relationship with me, despite her contentious divorce from my brother, and I hoped she might provide insight into how Marcus had positioned Sophia within the family hierarchy. Evangeline, I am so glad you called. I have been concerned about the messages Sophia is receiving from your parents about her being special or different from her cousins. She has started making comments at home about being the smartest grandchild, or the most important grandchild, and honestly, it is creating some troubling attitudes. Patricia's perspective was invaluable because she could see how the favoritism was affecting Sophia herself. Marcus has been telling Sophia that your parents love her more because she is exceptional, but I think he is actually teaching her some really unhealthy ideas about her worth compared to other children. Even more importantly, Patricia revealed that Marcus had been misrepresenting the financial arrangements to her as well. He told me that your parents set up the trust fund because they were concerned about Sophia's future security, but he made it sound like they had done similar things for all their grandchildren. I had no idea that your children were being excluded from educational planning and financial support. Patricia agreed to document any conversations where Marcus discussed the family financial arrangements or made disparaging comments about my children's prospects compared to Sophia's future. By Thursday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive collection of evidence that demonstrated systematic discrimination against my children based on racial prejudice and social climbing ambitions. The evidence included financial documentation proving unequal resource allocation, recorded conversations revealing racist reasoning behind the favoritism, professional medical opinion about psychological harm to children, detailed behavioral observations showing consistent discriminatory treatment, testimony from multiple family members who had witnessed the favoritism, documentation of how the favoritism was affecting Sophia's attitude toward her cousins. But I also had a strategy for confronting my parents that would make it impossible for them to dismiss my concerns or blame my accusations on jealousy. I was going to present the evidence systematically, demand specific explanations for their choices, and require them to either change their behavior or lose access to my children entirely. The confrontation would not be about asking for equal treatment. It would be about demanding accountability for the damage their favoritism had already caused and establishing clear boundaries for future interactions with all their grandchildren. Friday morning was going to change everything, and I was finally ready for the battle that would determine whether my children would grow up knowing their worth was not determined by their grandparents' prejudices. The family reckoning was about to begin. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that should have felt refreshing, but instead carried the weight of impending confrontation. I had arranged for all my allies to be present for what I was calling the family meeting. Jessica was driving down from Chicago. Dr. Mitchell had agreed to participate via video call, and Patricia was bringing additional documentation about Marcus's manipulation tactics. But 30 minutes before our scheduled confrontation, Jessica called with news that shattered my carefully constructed battle plan. "Evangeline, I need to tell you something and you are not going to like it. I spoke with Uncle William yesterday evening." My heart sank immediately. "Jessica, please tell me you did not warn him about what we were planning." "I thought I was helping you. I thought if I approached him privately and explained your concerns diplomatically, he might be more receptive to change. I was trying to smooth the path for your confrontation today." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Jessica had been my most trusted ally, the family member who had validated my observations and agreed to help me fight for my children's dignity. Now she was confessing that she had given my parents advance warning about the evidence I had gathered and the confrontation I had planned. "What exactly did you tell him, Jessica?" "I mentioned that you had found some financial documents and were concerned about unequal treatment of the grandchildren. I explained that you felt hurt by the favoritism toward Sophia and wanted to discuss creating more balanced relationships with all the children." Her diplomatic language had completely undermined the power of my evidence and the seriousness of my accusations. By framing my concerns as hurt feelings rather than systematic discrimination, Jessica had given my parents the opportunity to prepare defensive responses and minimize the impact of the racism and financial manipulation I had documented. "Jessica, I specifically told you about the racist reasoning behind the favoritism, the $2 million trust fund, and the private school arrangements. Did you mention any of that to Uncle William?" "I thought those details were too inflammatory to bring up in an initial conversation. I wanted to focus on the emotional impact on your children and see if he would be willing to make some adjustments voluntarily." The naive optimism behind her approach was infuriating but also heartbreaking. Jessica genuinely believed that diplomatic conversation could resolve systematic racism and financial discrimination. She had no understanding of how deeply entrenched these prejudices were, or how carefully Marcus had constructed the favoritism system to appeal to our parents' worst instincts. 20 minutes later, my father called to request a private conversation before the family meeting. His tone was measured and patronizing, confirming my worst fears about how he planned to handle my accusations. "Evangeline, Jessica mentioned that you have some concerns about how your mother and I interact with our grandchildren. We would like to address those concerns before involving other people in family business that should remain private." The phrase "family business that should remain private" was a clear signal that my parents intended to minimize and contain my accusations rather than address their substance. They were going to treat this as a family therapy session about hurt feelings, rather than a confrontation about documented discrimination and financial manipulation. "Dad, this is not about hurt feelings. This is about systematic favoritism that is psychologically damaging my children and reflects racial prejudices that have no place in our family." "Those are very serious accusations, Evangeline. I hope you have carefully considered the implications of making such claims about your mother and me. We have always loved all our grandchildren equally, and we resent any suggestion otherwise." His immediate denial and deflection confirmed that Jessica's warning had allowed him to prepare talking points designed to discredit my evidence and reframe the conversation. Instead of being caught off guard by documentation of their discriminatory behavior, my parents now had time to construct a narrative that portrayed them as innocent victims of my unreasonable accusations. The family meeting that morning was a disaster from the moment it began. My parents had clearly rehearsed their responses, presenting themselves as confused and hurt by my misinterpretation of their grandparental love. They acknowledged that Sophia had received some special attention, but explained it as responding to her particular needs and Marcus's requests for support. Evangeline, you seem to be suggesting that loving one grandchild means we love the others less, my mother said with perfectly practiced innocence. That is simply not how grandparental love works. We have different relationships with different grandchildren based on their individual personalities and circumstances. When I presented the financial documents, my father dismissed them as standard estate planning that had nothing to do with emotional favoritism. The trust fund arrangements are financial tools designed to help with Sophia's educational needs. Your children have different financial circumstances and different support systems. We make our financial decisions based on practical considerations, not emotional preferences. Dr. Mitchell's video call testimony about psychological damage was undermined by my parents' insistence that my children seemed perfectly happy and well-adjusted during their visits. Dr. Mitchell, with all due respect, you are seeing only one perspective on family dynamics that are much more complex than Evangeline has described. We appreciate your concern for the children's well-being, but we believe you are receiving incomplete information about our family relationships. Patricia's documentation about Marcus's manipulation tactics was dismissed as the bitter perspective of an ex-wife trying to cause problems between her former husband and his family. Patricia has her own agenda in these family matters, and we do not think her opinions should be given much weight in discussions about our grandchildren. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, my parents had successfully reframed the entire conversation. Instead of being held accountable for systematic discrimination, they were now positioned as loving grandparents, being unfairly attacked by a daughter who was misinterpreting innocent family dynamics through the lens of personal insecurity and racial sensitivity. The most devastating moment came when my father made his final statement. Evangeline, we love you and your children, but we cannot continue to have them in our home if you are going to monitor every interaction and interpret every gesture as evidence of favoritism or racism. We need you to decide whether you want to be part of this family or continue making accusations that are harmful to everyone involved. He had turned my fight for my children's dignity into an ultimatum that positioned me as the problem. Either I had to accept the discriminatory treatment and remain silent, or I had to remove my children from the family entirely. Jessica's well-intentioned betrayal had not only undermined my evidence, but had also allowed my parents to prepare a response strategy that left me with no good options. I could back down and accept continued discrimination against my children, or I could stand my ground and lose access to extended family relationships that my children valued despite their unequal treatment. As I loaded my children's belongings into my car that afternoon, preparing to leave my parents' house for what might be the final time, I realized that the betrayal had taught me something crucial about family loyalty and justice. Sometimes the people you trust most will sacrifice your children's dignity for their own comfort and social convenience. But I was not finished fighting. Jessica's betrayal had cost me the element of surprise, but it had not eliminated the evidence of systematic discrimination. I still had documentation of my parents' behavior and Marcus's manipulation. I still had professional testimony about psychological damage and witness accounts of favoritism. The battle had been lost, but the war for my children's dignity was far from over. I was about to discover that sometimes justice comes from unexpected sources, and family loyalty is not always found within blood relationships. My children deserved better than grandparents who would discriminate against them based on racial prejudice and social climbing ambitions. And I was going to make sure they understood their worth was not determined by people who had already demonstrated their moral limitations. The real fight was just beginning. 3 weeks after our disastrous family meeting, I was drowning in doubt and second-guessing every decision I had made. My children kept asking when we were going to visit Grandma and Grandpa again, and I struggled to explain why their grandparents no longer wanted to see them without revealing the racist reasoning behind the separation. Then, Patricia called with information that changed everything. "Evangeline, you need to know what Marcus told Sophia last weekend when she asked why her cousins were not at your parents' house anymore." I braced myself for another devastating revelation about how my brother was managing the family crisis. He told Sophia that your children had to stop visiting because they were making your parents uncomfortable with their behavior. He said your kids were jealous of Sophia's special relationship with her grandparents and had started causing problems that made everyone unhappy. The casual cruelty of Marcus using my children as scapegoats for the family rupture was breathtaking. He was teaching his own daughter that her cousins were fundamentally flawed people whose presence disrupted family harmony, while positioning himself and Sophia as the innocent victims of my unreasonable demands for equal treatment. "Patricia, there is something else you need to know about the financial arrangements." I explained the full scope of the trust fund and private school investments, plus the racist reasoning my parents had used to justify excluding my children from family resources. Patricia's response surprised me with its immediate clarity. "Evangeline, I work in corporate compliance, and what you are describing sounds like systematic discrimination that could have legal implications if this were happening in a workplace or educational setting. Have you considered documenting this pattern as a form of financial abuse or discriminatory treatment?" Her professional perspective opened possibilities I had never considered. Patricia suggested we approach the situation as a case study in family financial manipulation, rather than a personal dispute about hurt feelings. "Marcus has been lying to me about the scope of financial planning your parents have done for Sophia. He told me they set up a small education fund, not a $2 million trust with private school arrangements. If he is willing to lie to me about financial matters involving my own daughter, he is probably lying to your parents about other things as well." Patricia proposed an investigation strategy that would expose the full scope of Marcus's manipulation tactics and my parents' discriminatory decision-making. As a compliance professional, she knew how to document evidence systematically and present findings in ways that could not be dismissed or minimized. Our first breakthrough came when Patricia discovered that Marcus had been misrepresenting Sophia's academic abilities to justify the special educational investments. The private school admission documents he had shared with our parents included falsified test scores and fabricated teacher recommendations that made Sophia appear exceptionally gifted. "Evangeline, I have Sophia's actual school records, and while she is a bright child, she is performing at grade level in most subjects. Marcus created fictional academic achievements to convince your parents that investing in Sophia's education would produce extraordinary returns for the family legacy. The fraudulent documentation gave us concrete evidence that Marcus had deliberately deceived our parents about the basis for their financial favoritism. He had not simply appealed to their racial prejudices, he had constructed elaborate lies about Sophia's exceptional abilities to justify massive educational investments. But Patricia's most important contribution was connecting me with her colleague David Chen, an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse and family exploitation cases. David agreed to review our documentation and provide legal perspective on the manipulation tactics Marcus had used to secure financial advantages for his daughter. David's analysis was devastating for Marcus's carefully constructed narrative. "What you have documented appears to be a systematic campaign to defraud elderly parents through misrepresentation of facts and exploitation of emotional vulnerabilities." The fabricated academic records alone constitute fraud, and the manipulation of racial prejudices to secure financial benefits could be considered elder financial abuse. More importantly, David explained that the discriminatory trust fund arrangements could potentially be challenged on legal grounds if we could demonstrate that they were based on fraudulent information and racially discriminatory criteria. Your parents may have thought they were making informed financial decisions based on their grandson's honest assessment of his daughter's needs and abilities. If he deliberately misrepresented facts to secure financial advantages, their consent to the arrangements may not be legally valid. David offered to present our findings to my parents in a formal legal context that would force them to confront the scope of Marcus's deception and the discriminatory nature of their financial planning. The legal meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at David's office. Patricia and I had prepared a comprehensive presentation that included the fabricated school records, the discriminatory trust fund documentation, witness testimony about favoritism, and evidence of psychological impact on all the affected children. My parents arrived looking confused and defensive, clearly unprepared for a legal setting and formal presentation of evidence. Marcus was notably absent, claiming a work emergency that prevented his attendance. David's presentation was methodical and devastating. He walked my parents through each piece of evidence, explaining how Marcus had systematically deceived them about the basis for financial favoritism, while exploiting their emotional vulnerabilities and social ambitions. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, the documents show that your financial planning decisions were based on fabricated information about your granddaughter's academic abilities and misleading claims about her educational needs. Your son appears to have deliberately manipulated your desire to support family success in order to secure advantages for his daughter, while ensuring his sister's children would be excluded from similar benefits. The moment when David presented the falsified test scores was particularly powerful. My mother's face went pale as she realized that the exceptional abilities she thought justified massive educational investments were completely fictional. Additionally, the recorded conversations we have document reasoning for the financial favoritism that reflects racial prejudices rather than legitimate educational planning. Your son appears to have encouraged these prejudices as a strategy for securing resources for his own daughter. My father's response revealed both shock and anger. Are you telling us that Marcus lied about Sophia's test scores and academic achievements? The evidence suggests that your son provided you with fabricated documentation to support financial arrangements that would benefit his daughter, while systematically excluding his sister's children. The academic records he shared with you do not match the official school documentation that his ex-wife has provided. The legal confrontation accomplished what my emotional appeals had not. It forced my parents to see Marcus's behavior as manipulation, rather than family advocacy. And it presented the discriminatory financial arrangements as products of deception, rather than informed grandparental choice. But the most powerful moment came when David presented Dr. Mitchell's psychological assessment of the impact on all 4 grandchildren, including Sophia. The systematic favoritism you have implemented is not only harmful to the excluded children, it is also damaging to the favored child who is being taught that her worth depends on being superior to her cousins, rather than on her own individual achievements and character. My mother began crying as she realized that the special treatment they thought was helping Sophia was actually teaching her unhealthy attitudes about family relationships and her own self-worth. By the end of the meeting, my parents understood that they had been victims of Marcus's manipulation as much as my children had been victims of their discriminatory treatment. The financial arrangements they thought reflected wise family planning were actually products of fraud and exploitation. David concluded the presentation with a clear path forward. You have the opportunity to address these issues voluntarily by restructuring the financial arrangements to reflect equal treatment of all grandchildren and establishing family interaction guidelines that prevent future discrimination. The alternative is potential legal action to challenge the validity of financial decisions that were based on fraudulent information and discriminatory criteria. My parents chose voluntary correction over potential legal consequences. They agreed to establish equal educational trust funds for all 4 grandchildren, restructure the private school arrangements to be available to any grandchild who wanted them, and participate in family therapy to address the underlying prejudices that had made them vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation. More importantly, they agreed to confront Marcus about his deceptive tactics and require him to participate in the family restoration process if he wanted to maintain relationships with his parents and access to their financial support. The alliance with Patricia and David had accomplished what my emotional appeals could not. It had exposed the full scope of systematic deception and discrimination, while providing a clear path toward justice and family healing. My children were going to grow up knowing their worth was not determined by their racial background or their uncle's willingness to lie and manipulate for personal advantage. The battle for family dignity had finally been won. The confrontation with Marcus happened on a Saturday morning in my parents' living room, the same space where my children had been dismissed as second-class family members just 2 months earlier. This time, however, the power dynamics had completely shifted. My parents had spent the previous week reviewing all the evidence David and Patricia had presented, and my mother later told me that the nights following our legal meeting were some of the worst of her life. She kept thinking about my children sleeping in that basement, while Sophia enjoyed the upstairs bedrooms, realizing that what she had framed as practical family management was actually systematic cruelty based on prejudices she was ashamed to acknowledge. Marcus arrived expecting a typical family discussion where he could charm his way through any accusations and maintain his position as the golden child who could do no wrong. Instead, he walked into a room where his parents were holding copies of the fabricated school records he had used to justify Sophia's special treatment. Marcus. My father began, his voice carrying an authority I had rarely heard him use with his son. We need you to explain why you provided us with falsified academic records for Sophia, and why you encouraged us to make financial decisions based on information you knew was not true. The look of panic that crossed Marcus's face was immediate and unmistakable. He had not expected to be confronted with concrete evidence of his deception, and he clearly had not prepared explanations for being caught in systematic lies about his daughter's abilities and educational needs. Dad, I think there has been some misunderstanding about the school documents. Sometimes these things get mixed up, and maybe there was confusion about which tests. Marcus, my mother interrupted with ice-cold clarity. We have Sophia's actual school records sitting next to the documents you gave us. The test scores you claimed she achieved are 15 to 20 points higher than her real performance. The teacher recommendations you showed us include quotes from teachers who never actually taught her. We know you deliberately provided us with fraudulent information. The systematic dismantling of his deception continued as my parents presented each piece of evidence Patricia and I had gathered. The racist reasoning he had encouraged them to adopt. The financial manipulation that secured millions of dollars for his daughter, while ensuring my children received nothing. The lies he had told Patricia about the scope of the trust fund arrangements. But the moment that broke Marcus's composure completely was when my mother played the recording of him explaining to me that Sophia deserved special treatment because she represented purity of bloodline and breeding that my mixed-race children did not possess. I cannot believe that my own son encouraged me to discriminate against my grandchildren based on their racial background. My mother said, her voice shaking with anger and shame. I cannot believe that you manipulated my worst instincts to secure financial advantages for your daughter, while ensuring your sister's children would be treated as lesser family members. Marcus tried several different defense strategies, claiming his words had been taken out of context, suggesting that practical considerations had been misinterpreted as racial bias, arguing that someone needed to advocate for Sophia's future in a competitive world. None of his explanations could address the systematic nature of his manipulation or the documented evidence of his fraudulent tactics. The consequences my parents imposed were swift and comprehensive. The trust fund arrangements were immediately restructured to provide equal educational support for all 4 grandchildren. Sophia's private school admission was maintained, but similar opportunities would be available to my children when they reached appropriate ages. The financial favoritism that had systematically excluded my children from family resources was completely dismantled. More importantly, Marcus was required to participate in family therapy, focused on addressing the prejudices and manipulation tactics that had created the discriminatory treatment. His continued access to family financial support was made conditional on his willingness to acknowledge his deception and work toward repairing the damage he had caused to family relationships. The most satisfying moment came when my parents insisted that Marcus explain to Sophia why her cousins had been absent from family gatherings, and why the special treatment she had received was being changed to include equal consideration for all grandchildren. Sophia needs to understand that being loved does not require being superior to other people, my father explained. She needs to learn that family love should bring people together, not create hierarchies that divide children against each other. 3 months later, my children were back in the upstairs bedrooms during our weekend visit to my parents' house. But more importantly, they were back in conversations where their thoughts and interests receive the same attention and validation that Sophia received. They were included in educational planning discussions and financial conversations appropriate for their ages. The change in family dynamics was remarkable. Without the artificial hierarchy that Marcus had constructed, all 4 grandchildren began developing genuine relationships based on their individual personalities, rather than their perceived value within family power structures. Sophia, freed from the pressure to maintain superiority over her cousins, became a more relaxed and genuinely affectionate child. My parents enrolled in educational programs about racial bias and family equity, acknowledging that their vulnerability to Marcus's manipulation reflected prejudices they needed to address consciously and continuously. They also established regular check-ins with Dr. Mitchell to ensure that their interactions with all grandchildren supported healthy emotional development. The most unexpected outcome was the relationship Patricia and I developed through our alliance. Working together to expose the truth about family manipulation created a friendship based on shared commitment to our children's well-being. Our children now have regular playdates, and Patricia has become one of my closest confidants about navigating post-divorce parenting challenges. Marcus eventually completed the required family therapy, though his participation was reluctant, and his acknowledgement of wrongdoing remained minimal. The important change was that his ability to manipulate family dynamics through deception and prejudice exploitation had been completely eliminated. My parents now fact-check any claims he makes about educational needs or financial requirements and they include me in all discussions about grandchildren to ensure equal consideration for all 4 children. Most importantly, my children learned that their worth is not determined by other people's prejudices or willingness to discriminate against them. They learned that justice sometimes requires fighting for dignity, even when that fight is difficult and painful. They learned that family love should never require accepting less than equal treatment. 6 months after our basement sleeping experience, my daughter Madison wrote a school essay about family courage that brought me to tears. She wrote about learning that sometimes people you love make mistakes that hurt you, but that speaking truth about those mistakes is how families become stronger and more loving. The trust funds are now equal for all 4 grandchildren. The bedroom arrangements rotate so that all children experience being welcomed equally in their grandparents' home. Most importantly, family conversations now include all voices and perspectives, rather than centering around one favored child. Looking back on this experience, I realized that the systematic discrimination my children faced was never really about them. It was about the adults in their lives making choices based on fear, prejudice, and social ambition, rather than love and moral courage. The justice we achieved was not about punishing anyone, but about creating family relationships based on equality, honesty, and genuine care for all children's well-being. My children now know that their worth comes from their own character achievements and capacity for love, not from their racial background, their parents' financial status, or their ability to meet other people's expectations for family legacy. They know that family means fighting for each other's dignity, speaking truth about injustice, and creating relationships that honor everyone's equal humanity. Have you ever had to fight for fairness within your own family? Have you witnessed favoritism that hurt children you love or discovered that family financial decisions were based on discrimination rather than equal care? The courage to speak truth about family injustice can be one of the hardest things we ever do. But it is also how we protect our children's sense of worth and create relationships based on genuine love rather than prejudice and manipulation. Drop a comment and share your own experiences with family favoritism or fighting for equal treatment. Your story might help someone else find the courage to stand up for their children's dignity. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding justice and healing within complicated family dynamics. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their children's worth is never determined by other people's limitations or prejudices. Thank you for listening to my family's journey from systematic discrimination to genuine equality. I hope our experience reminds you that family love should always bring out the best in each other. Never require some children to accept less than they deserve. Until next time, keep fighting for the families. We all deserve the ones built on equal love, honest communication, and the courage to do what is right even when it is difficult.